Hey everyone, it's Daniel Ferens. I was the screenwriter of Halloween 6, and I'm here to talk about this movie with Alan Howarth, who is the composer not only for this movie, but so many other Halloweens before, and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, Alan Howarth here. We're here to review The Ghost of Halloween 6, the producer's cut.
Which is an amazing thing. I'm just amazed that we're here talking about this version of the movie, which has been, bootlegged for so many years and been such a curiosity among fans. That they're releasing this after almost 20 years is pretty shocking to me and kind of a relief because now I don't have to be asked, when is the producer's cut of Halloween 6 going to be released? But this is the producer's cut, and it was named that because this was supposed to be the final approved, theatrical version of the movie. And then when they tested it with a couple of audiences on the East Coast, I think it tested poorly, and so that was the point at which the studio, Miramax, had decided to reshoot much of it. And that will become a lot of our conversation as we go on.
Yeah, and it's, for me, I haven't seen it since those days. And so just reviewing the differences between what was the intent from Mr. Farron's writing, what got to screen, and then what you guys got to see out in the real world.
I mean, it starts right away. I mean, this whole opening, which I think is really creepy, and this movie, I think, is dripping with atmosphere, which is fantastic. But they, for me, even just starting with the main credits, I mean, I had written this in the script of this very elaborate main title sequence with the pumpkin that we all know from the series, and a series of kind of interspersing kind of flashbacks to the events from 1 to 2, 4, and 5 to kind of bring us up to speed so we would really know what's going on here. But all of that got dropped, even from this version. So this just is sort of the beginning of a whole bunch of things that kind of differed from what I had written or what I was going for. And obviously a huge part of this movie is that this is supposed to be the character of Jamie that we knew from 4 and 5 as the little girl played by Danielle Harris. And there's just so much talk and so much interest in why she didn't do the film. And I think Danielle's being interviewed for this special edition, so she talks about it. But J.C. Brandy played her in this movie, and she did a great job. I think she was brought in at the last second. Danielle was cast in the film, and it really turned out to be just a money issue between her and the studio. And we all really, really pushed to get her in the movie, and she was really upset that she didn't get to do it. I was really upset she didn't get to do it. Mustafa Akkad really fought to get her in there, and it just turned out to be a money thing, unfortunately. But it's good to know she gets some residuals off this movie because they do have a flashback of her in this version of the film. I'm sorry, Alan.
So why don't you tell us about this character that just showed up with the boots with the little silver things on it?
All right. Well, he was the kind of, the phantom that appeared in Halloween 5 that was done by Dominique, and nobody knew who he was. Even when they made 5, I was told they didn't have any idea who this guy was. He just had walked in and walked through the movie in some scenes, and we'd seen a little glimpse of this strange symbol on his wrist. And then he blew up the jail, and Michael Myers was gone at the end of the 5th movie, and little Jamie was standing there saying no in the smoky hallway. Cut to end credits. And that was all we knew. So it was really my job and part of my pitch when I met Mustafa and Paul Freeman and Malik Akkad to really kind of answer that question. It was one of the biggest things that they wanted to have answered, was the identity of this guy. And I really wanted to take it back to the mythology of the original movie. We turned him into Dr. Wynn. I don't think I'm giving anything away here. Dr. Wynn was the character in the very first film that Loomis is walking to his car with and says, he didn't even know how to drive a car. And maybe somebody around here gave him lessons. And it was that piece of information, that little bit of kind of I don't know if it was so much a red herring or anything. I don't think John meant anything by it other than just Michael sort of had a very dark influence over everybody that was there watching over him in this mental hospital. But we kind of ran with it and took it into this direction, for better or worse. Here's the flashback I was talking about. They removed this from the final theatrical cut, and this to me helped at least bridge the story of the ending of 5 to this movie. And that's Danielle walking through the police station, and she walks through the back door. And this is new footage that we shot. And there he is being put in the van, and she's abducted. They take off, and boom. So I felt like that was at least some connective thread between the last movie and this one, but ultimately they decided to take it out. One of those other many things that we questioned along the way, like what are they thinking? Why are they doing this? But and this woman playing this part here of the midwife, she was in Audrey Rose from the film Audrey Rose in the 70s. And I think they thought that was a bit of stunt casting. I didn't quite get it. But it was a great sort of opening of just having a chase at the beginning and putting Michael out there and getting him on the loose again.
Yeah, there's some questions about the music for this. Obviously, I scored to this version of the movie because this was going to be the movie, and so that portion that has been eliminated will now be available on a special edition CD that I'll have on my own label, as well as a companion piece with the extended version of Halloween 6. So I'm working on that now.
Can't wait.
And
We get asked that all the time. I mean, because it was such a cool score you came up with for this movie, and I felt like it had strains of some of your early collaborations with John Carpenter and some of the synthesizers I think that you guys used back in the day, the Prophets and things like that. And I think I remember talking to you early on when we were scoring this, and I think Joe Chappelle, the director, had said he wanted like little refrains to the sounds of things like Escape from New York and Christine and some of those early things that you did with John, which I think you definitely brought some of that to this. And also kind of a Gregorian kind of gothic vibe to some of it because of the occult aspects of the movie. I thought that was kind of a cool new feature to the score.
Yeah, the occult element with the ruins definitely gave me a chance to use deep dark voices.
Yep.
I also pulled out the electric guitar.
Yes, I remember.
And rather than doing it, only since stepped up to the plate to add the Halloween theme on electric guitar and put a lot more percussion. So I kind of added a rock and roll flavor to it, trying to continue to have these things evolve, and didn't want to just be stuck in the same box.
Absolutely. And here, this kill actually I thought was kind of cool and reminiscent the way he kind of stands back and tilts his head. The problem was with the way I'd written it in the script, I'd envisioned him coming out and kind of that mask just slowly materializing in the darkness like he did in the first one and the second one, which are just such great, creepy, building, moody moments of those films. And unfortunately, what we got was just kind of the face appearing, and then 5 seconds later, she's hanging on the wall. It's a great, creepy kill, but it just happens too fast. And this chase was originally designed of her, it was written that she'd be running through the woods and branches scraping at her face, and she runs out and she's supposed to flag down this guy in a truck who's just passing on the road. But because of budget or weather or whatever was going on, they just kind of had her run through train tracks and drop this kid. And and then the guy just happens to be sitting there, which I always was kind of like he's having a beer in the rain. I didn't quite get, but it would have been really cool if she just sort of appeared out in the middle of the road, waving her hands with this baby in her arms. I just thought that was like a creepy, great opening image, or at least for the I should say second kill in a row here. And this was one of the effects that they later went back and enhanced, and they added a kind of a, more of a he twisted his whole head off, as I recall, in the finished version, the theatrical version that was released. People have asked how she knew how to drive a car. I'm like, I guess if you were being chased by Michael Myers with a baby in your arms and bodies piling up around you, you'd figure it out. This shot is another one of those moments in the production of the film that really kind of got me, because this was written as kind of a homage to the original, where the POV walks up to the house. It was supposed to enter the house, go in the back door, pick up a knife, go up the stairs, stab the girl, Kara, and this little kid wakes up from the nightmare. And on the day that we were shooting it, the UPM just shut it down. I don't know if they were going into overtime or what happened, but we lost this great kind of, I felt, iconic moment to start the movie off. But this is like a continuation of the Strode family. This is kind of, I guess they would be the closest we could say would be cousins of the people that adopted Laurie Strode. So this is Kara, the cousin, and her young boy, Danny. Danny's definitely a nod to the boy in The Shining. Not myself, but Danny Lloyd from The Shining. Because he had psychic powers. Kind of like this kid we're sort of intimating had some sort of psychic ability. Marianne Hagen came in. She auditioned, I want to say early in the process, but she really had that kind of every girl quality. And she looked a little, like that she'd sort of lived a little and had a hard time. And we liked that she had a bit of a Jamie Lee Curtis vibe, but maybe a little bit older.
Good night, Danny.
One of the tricks to making the score to these kinds of things is the alternation of sound and silence. So when I was thinking about how to score it, the idea was to make a intense score from the beginning and then just let the movie play. Let the actors act and only come in when it was time to transition from point A to point B, or if there was another creepy moment, like on the knife or something like that, where it's just a little accent.
Right.
But give everybody a rest, because obviously we have another X minutes of this to make it to the end, and if you're just loud all the time, it goes away.
Sure.
You lose the impact.
Right. I think all of this, I had fun writing all of this radio dialogue. It was kind of one of the things I initially pitched with this movie was, let's use a device like the radio station that's kind of doing this Halloween, Michael Myers kind of, almost a kind of a celebration of the mass murders of Haddonfield and kind of getting all these wacky callers to call in. We had originally hoped to go out to Howard Stern to play this part, which we thought would be hilarious, but we obviously didn't get him. My other choice was to see if we could get the comedian Mike Myers to do this, just because of the funny connection with the name. But that didn't happen. But, I think the idea of having this sort of shock jock on the radio and talking about this, originally when I wrote the treatment, it was going to be Tommy Doyle on the radio. He ran kind of like a pirate radio station at the college. And he had a girlfriend that was Lindsay from the original film, but they decided to kind of make Tommy more of like they wanted him to be more kind of like a loner, kind of a hermit. And so here's Paul Rudd's first appearance, and my God, what a career he's had since. And, I remember meeting him when we first started shooting, and he was just kind of your every guy, just the way he sort of plays in the movies he's in today. And just a really friendly guy, really happy to be a part of this project, that he's playing the grown-up Tommy from the original Halloween. I had originally told them, we should go after Brian Andrews, who played little Tommy, and just sort of meet with him. Even if we didn't put him in the role, it would have been fun to put a cameo where he kind of met, maybe the guy at the bus depot when he walks in. I thought that would have been kind of a cool nod. But Paul was great, and there's this sort of word out there, or rumor among the fans, that he kind of disowned this movie or hates the movie. I think he really, like most of us, really didn't like that they went and messed with it so much. He had signed up to make more of this bloodless, kind of scary, old-fashioned horror film, and they ended up kind of turning it into this very, graphic, gory thing that he just didn't really approve of, and none of us really did. So I don't think it's so much that he disowned the movie as much as he kind of wasn't happy with the changes.
Yeah, a little add-in on that note. So yeah, the sort of the family, we'll call it, was involved in making this version. We made it the best we could make it. Then we have this third-party element, being the great distributor, have all this input, talk to Joe Chappelle, say, Joe, we need this and this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
And sort of we get removed, and it heads down another freeway,
Right.
With most of us not being included, although I did go back and rescore the next version. So a lot of my score is the same with the same stuff, but when there was something new, I had to beef it up.
And we got to give a little shout out. Donald Pleasence, his last movie, his last Halloween, his last screen appearance as Dr. Loomis. I mean, he just was so synonymous with this franchise. And to write this role for him I felt so beneath it and so not equipped to do it, because the dialogue that John and Deborah had written for him in the first two was so memorable and almost Shakespearean in a way. And I remember being most daunted by that. But when I got a call from him saying that he loved the script, and he had his agent, who had been his agent, I think, for 50 years or something in London, and she said that she couldn't sleep after she'd read it. She slept with the lights on. So that to me was quite the compliment. And here we introduce this actor Mitch Ryan, who played Dr. Wynn in the film. I wrote the part, I want to be very clear, I wrote the part of this character, Dr. Wynn, specifically with Christopher Lee in mind to play this role. It was a long-held I don't even know if it's a rumor. I think it's been said many times that Loomis, the character that Donald plays, was originally written with Christopher Lee in mind, and he turned it down. So I thought, what a great kind of coming full circle if we could cast these two great horror icons in the same movie side by side. The producers didn't agree. They felt like this guy, the villain from Lethal Weapon, would be a better choice. I still disagree.
Yeah, some of the undertone that you're referring to is that who's driving this bus kind of got to be the issue. Having done Halloween 4, 5, and 6 in the post-Carpenter era,
Right.
It was kind of everybody wanted their hands on the steering wheel now.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the first one, I think, Mustafa Akkad, who I have to say was incredibly gracious to me and really supportive of the ideas that I had, as well as his son Malik, and always kind of was pushing us to do something that was more suspenseful, more frightening, more in the tradition of the original. And I think, when he made 4 and 5 very independently. This was the first one that became, after 4 and 5, that became a studio product. It was Miramax. They were new on the block. Pulp Fiction, I think, had just come out. They certainly were, people to be reckoned with in the industry. They were owned a subsidiary of Disney at the time. I remember Disney executives with Mickey Mouse jackets walking around the set, which I thought just what a great irony all of that was. But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and I think that's, one of the things that just really went haphazard and went south with this movie was there were just too many people with too many points of view coming in to kind of, mess with the recipe. And I don't think that the script was ever perfect, but I think that it was something very different from the movie they ended up making, and certainly the one they ended up releasing.
Yeah, and under that same aegis, it got to be an issue of who has the final say.
Absolutely, that's what happened, and while I've produced my share of films on my own, and I get that money and budget is always forefront in everybody's mind, but I do feel like a lot of decisions were made that just kind of just didn't seem to make sense, even from a budgetary standpoint. I think we're scenes like that opening that I was telling you about just got cut right there on the day. For no other reason other than we're cutting, we're going home early. I don't know if somebody had a headache. I don't know what it was. But, and then there's this long-standing rumor that Quentin Tarantino wrote the first draft of this movie. That's completely untrue. I think it's just become kind of an urban legend. Scott Spiegel, who is very tied with Tarantino and Lawrence Bender and those guys, he had come up with a treatment, I'm told. This was before I was brought in. It was one that Mustafa didn't particularly like. It was put aside very quickly, and a whole bunch of writers came in before I was ever hired. And I was this kid. I was, 20 when I met Mustafa the first time. I waited for 4.5 years before I got the call, and they called me at the last minute, probably out of desperation. They didn't have anything. They had a start date to shoot this in Salt Lake City in the fall of '94. They had the mask made. They had nothing else. They had a crew that was ready to go, and they had no script. So I was called in the summer, and this was probably June, and we were in production by October. So it all happened very quickly. It was, for me, a dream come true. I grew up loving these movies, and I lobbied for this job for a long, long time. And I think Malik Akkad would certainly attest to my persistence in terms of getting their attention. At one point, I had a guy, I think, deliver a sample script of mine dressed as the Shape and scared Mustafa's assistant out of her chair. So, but, I was young. I didn't know you're not supposed to do those things. But it got their attention. Or, it maybe had been one of those things, too, where I think they needed somebody with a passion and kind of a vision for this. And I think to this day, I think the Malik Akkad would say that I think I'm kind of the walking encyclopedia of the Halloween series.
So Daniel, tell me about why Michael Myers has ownership of this child.
That is a good question. It went through so many permutations. We originally the way I pitched this was it was going to be kind of like the vibe of it was like a Rosemary's Baby. Jamie was going to give birth. She'd been abducted by this sort of secret society, this underground sort of coven. And the paternity of this baby was never to be definitively answered. I think in this version, you kind of get the sense that there was incest involved and that Michael was going to, it was like the son of Michael Myers. Maybe that would be a sequel down the road. Mm-hmm. But I always thought of it as, we don't know. She was drug induced. There was this, kind of forced pregnancy. But the idea is, in the mythology, was that we wanted to bring it to this place that John had sort of hinted at in the original movie, which was, it was the night of Samhain, when the veil between the living and the dead is sort of the thinnest on that night, and that this evil that drives Michael Myers is released on that night. It's when he becomes active. It's when he comes to life and does what he does, and seeks out his bloodline. And we wanted to kind of create the last of the bloodline, and the idea was that we wanted to have this innocent sacrifice, and that through that sacrifice, ultimately, that evil could be transferred to another child, and this whole thing would begin again. And that's what these kind of crazy culties believed. I don't think that my intention was that they ever controlled him. I always thought that he controlled them. It was almost like in the original movie I think the television version where they say that the staff of Smith's Grove feared him, that they did what he wanted. They were at his beck and call. And mm-hmm. I always sort of thought that they almost worshipped him, that he was almost like a kind of a deity to them.
That makes sense. And then, so the idea, the evil of Michael Myers would transfer to this child?
To the little boy that we saw who had the nightmare at the beginning. Right. And he was going to kind of pick up the mantle from there. And that was one sort of incarnation of it. And then, I think by the time they got to the theatrical release, I think that they had blown it into this idea of, which I don't think makes any sense, or never made sense to me, still doesn't, which is this whole notion of that they were using it for some sort of scientific research. And, they had these fetuses floating around in fish tanks. And I don't know what any of it was about. I guess I get asked this question probably once a week from a fan somewhere in the world, what did that ending mean? And I wish I could tell them, but I didn't write that ending. There were probably about 10 drafts of this script, I would say, in total, between 10 and 12. Also, the original treatment that I wrote was really ambitious, and I think when Mr. Akkad read it, he felt like it was too much for one movie, but he thought, this could be part 6, and then the second part is part 7. And in part 7, we would have learned that much of the town of Haddonfield was sort of involved in this kind of conspiracy. We never got to that because they made H2O. This also was the first scene where we saw little Jamie, now almost grown-up Jamie. She was supposed to be about between 15 and 16 in this movie. She looks a little older, but I guess it's been a tough 5 years on this girl. But this is the first scene we were supposed to see her, and then we were going to see the character in the second part of the movie. And then the part that they never filmed was the third act, where she actually was going to come back and put up this incredible fight against the Shape and really kind of do that kind of fight to the finish with him to kind of bring that character to her rightful conclusion. And I felt like they kind of missed that as well. I mean, by writing her off so early in the story, in this version, she does live halfway through. But in the theatrical cut, when they kill her and they reshot that kill, it was a completely, it was almost like they just wrote her off. And I felt that was kind of a cheat, the people that liked 4 and 5 and liked the character. And it would have just been really fun to have Danielle in the film and have her finish it off. This was the first day of shooting in Salt Lake City, and it was freezing. I was there with Handycam shooting some behind-the-scenes stuff, which I think should be on this Blu-ray.
But this music cue is obviously from the original Halloween.
Oh, I loved it.
Which was sort of the empty street. This is the setup for Here It Comes. Halloween is on its way, the evening of, and so when I inherited Halloween from John Carpenter, there's sort of I'll use the word Bible in a different way, but the way you do it was established by John Carpenter, and all the producers wanted just to replicate that. So do what John did before. Do your own version. Do your own modification, but I need those themes in these different places because that's what makes Halloween musically.
Without a doubt. And when that theme, I called it the Laurie's theme, which I think it was called in the early part of the series, but it was such a great, and I'm so glad you brought it back for 6 because I don't think it was used in 4 or 5.
No, but we didn't have that kind of setup.
Yep.
So because they were revisiting as much of the original, because obviously when you're in sequel mode, you go back to the original and where were the values, where were the threads? As you said, you went back to these little hints.
Yeah.
A name is mentioned, and then you branch out into a character off of that, etc. So that's where the expansion points are made. And John Carpenter will tell you that there was never intention to make any sequels.
No.
He acquiesced to Halloween 2, and that was successful in its own way. We went to depart for Halloween 3 to get away from Michael Myers, but the fans said, "What happened to Michael Myers?" So there was a lot of discussion, a lot of tension over that, and eventually it was settled that here we go. So
here we go.
4, 5, and 6.
And then guys like me had to kind of figure out a way to extend it and have it live on in some ways. And, I think 4 certainly was successful in its own right, and 5 kind of went off the grid a little bit, but we really wanted to bring the flavor of Halloween back and adding these elements of sort of occultism and that kind of vibe to this movie. The scene that was just prior to this was another cut scene that didn't make it to the final theatrical cut, which I think was unfortunate. I felt like this, again, because it was Donald's last film, he had died prior to doing the reshoots on this, and I just felt like put more of him in than less. It's, without him, these movies wouldn't have existed, or certainly wouldn't have been as popular.
Well, he's the opposite pole of Michael Myers.
Right.
He's in some ways his handler.
Right.
Via his own methods, but the only one that can make sense and predict and anticipate what he'll do next.
Absolutely, his sort of the Van Helsing of the series, and almost kind of strangely a father figure to Michael. I think a foil, but also an unspoken connection. There's a reason for his obsession with him, and that great monologue that Donald delivered in the first film that just sort of crystallized who this character was and how he became so obsessed with this patient of his. And we really wanted to keep that alive and sort of take it to that next level. Here we're going to figure out why. And by the end of this movie, there's this sort of strange, or this version of the movie, where now Loomis is not just the hunter. He now is going to almost become the protector. This thing has made its way into him. He's been infected by this evil by the end of the film. And we thought that would be an interesting way to take the next movie, had we been lucky enough to do one with Donald. This I call the ordinary people family scene, and I want to always say, does it, with the mother serving breakfast, because she was in that classic movie from the 80s called Better Off Dead, where she says, does it have raisins in it? I get that all the time from fans. So, but this was like kind of this dysfunctional family scene, and took a long time to shoot, almost too long for a movie that's a genre film. But it kind of set up this kind of dysfunctional dynamic between the family, and we understand who this girl was. I always thought that the father and Kara Strode had this rift because she got pregnant in high school and left. This man's obviously abusive and certainly not the kind of dad you want to move back into his house with, but I think times were tough and she had to come home. And the family was supposed to be from New York originally, kind of an Irish family. His brother would have been the man we saw in the original movie handing Jamie Lee the keys to the old Myers place, saying, put these under the mat. And so he's kind of inherited the family business. They've moved to town and I guess, moved them into this house without telling them. It's history.
Well, he's definitely the kind of character that we can't wait to see him get killed.
Absolutely. And I think every horror movie has to have one. I don't know if this played it a little too over the top with this particular guy, but it definitely got a reaction. I remember the audience screaming and out loud at this moment and saying, "It's the new Michael Myers! It's the new Michael Myers!" When the little boy was pointing the knife at his crotch. I just talked to him a week or so ago, and he's 27 years old now. So it gives me a sense of just how long it's been since this movie and how much older I feel.
Well, my first encounter with John Carpenter was Escape from New York, so that was 1980.
Wow.
So we're sitting at year 34 of my knowing John and having worked with him intensely in the 80s, and obviously things move on and we keep going.
And without you guys, so many people wouldn't have a career, myself included. The work that you guys did was just so inspiring to me and a generation of filmmakers. I mean, I literally just, I grew up on these things and these scores. I bought every, LP that you guys advertised in Fangoria. And I never missed a John Carpenter film in those days. It was truly a part of my life and my film school. So.
Well, I remember when we made the soundtrack to Escape from New York as an LP, he said, "Really? People want to listen to that?"
Oh, they do.
And I said, "Yeah. It's part of the movie."
Without a doubt. I remember this man in black character going back to this notion of this, this figure that we saw at the end of 5 and who makes random appearances in this movie until the end when we kind of reveal who he really was. I even called the writer of Halloween 5 to ask if he had a notion of who this guy was supposed to be, and they didn't know. I actually had to go to the Bodhi Tree, which is a kind of a famous sort of New Age bookstore here in LA, to kind of do the research and figure out what that symbol was, what the rune was. So the thorn all came from my own research and kind of putting all those pieces together as much as I could. I do like this scene here with Paul Rudd up in the window, and I kind of jokingly called this the peeping Tommy moment. Just this strange guy that sort of hangs out in his apartment and with all these kind of weird conspiracy theories and articles about the murders, and he's kind of been so traumatized by what happened to him as a kid, it's become kind of his fixation. And the design was that if this was successful, we could make him the foil that would go on in future episodes, and have Tommy sort of take over where Loomis left off. So if Loomis became the evil one, Tommy would now become that sort of kind of the agent of good. And again, I remember that you put the I call it the Laurie's theme, but the Halloween, the street theme, but that you played this through this whole section of the movie, which really helped it. And I remember this got removed from the theatrical cut, which I just cringed because that part of the movie now, it feels so dead to me without the music that, as you mentioned, just really helps kind of carry the story and take us and thematically kind of tying some of these pieces together.
Well, and it makes the movie Halloween.
Yes. Absolutely. I know there's a reference here to Russellville, which was a town also mentioned in the first film. Old Charlie Bowles, who had murdered his family in Russellville, and I wanted to bring that back. Lots of references. Even the address on the house, 45 Lampkin Lane, that was in number 2. So for the uber geeks, there's a lot of that stuff in this movie that I tried to, just pepper in there as much as I could. This is the character I thought should have been played by the real Tommy Doyle, the original Tommy Doyle, Brian Andrews, who's such a nice guy, and I think would have been happy to do the part. Just to have him kind of come face to face with, the grown-up Tommy, I thought would have been a fun little nod. See how that music is just so haunting, and I love the way it just carries this whole sequence.
Yeah, it also keeps like a clock running.
Right.
Time passing, and valuable time passing.
Right.
Where something's happened, it's a mystery. It could get away from us if we don't stay on it. And here he's doing investigation. What is that? Where'd this go? How do I find that?
It's just a lot of blood hanging out there that nobody else happened to see. I think in the script it was like a few droplets. Somebody in art had a good time with that, apparently. But I also remember there was a very early winter in Salt Lake City. I think we started, my memory serves, I think we started filming this movie like on Halloween Day or the day before. So it was that time of year. And so all the leaves and all the things that you see on the streets and all that great atmospheric stuff that looks just like, fall, it's because it is. It's not like the original movie where they were in Pasadena throwing, 2 bags of leaves around to make it look like it was the fall. This really was. The problem was they had a really early winter and snow hit us within a week or so of shooting the exterior. So a lot of the exterior stuff got bumped to interior because they couldn't shoot outside. It wasn't supposed to be snowing on Halloween. So that was another big issue. one of the bigger set pieces now is like you see this branding iron or whatever, like this thing up on a, this was written, I mean, talk about, having different ideas in my mind. This was supposed to be almost like a crop circle. And in this script, and I don't know if you remember this, Alan, Loomis and Dr. Wynn were supposed to fly in on a helicopter. It was supposed to be this big moment where they kind of come and they land in this field and they discover, Jamie being kind of lifted away. And that got taken out for budgetary reasons. And I think there was also a concern Donald's health was failing. You can tell he's not himself, even by this point. And so they wanted to keep it as easy as they could. They didn't put him through the makeup, with the burns from Halloween 2. They kind of wrote that off in kind of a cheesy little line about he had plastic surgery, and which I didn't think was a great idea, but it was better, I think, than subjecting him to hours of, prosthetics and makeup and things like that. They just wanted to make
just for a continuity thread, it wasn't worth it.
Right. By that time, we could kind of accept that he's moved on and he's still alive. He survived that giant blast at the end of 2.
Which was supposed to kill everybody again, and it failed.
Who knew? You can't kill evil, right? And apparently there's also giant mountains in the middle of Illinois because you can see them in certain shots, this being one of them. And in fact, I want to say, if you look closely, you can see that they're snow-capped. And this is supposed to be kind of the junior college of the town. It's the kids are kind of creating a rally. There's this movement to bring Halloween back, like it's been banned for 5 years, and now the kids want to bring it back, and that's kind of the whole notion of the fair and the Harvest Festival, which was in the script again was a much bigger kind of set piece than what it ended up in the movie.
Looks like your little boy's got himself quite an imagination.
He's been having nightmares.
Let's see, that's where we see Thorn spelled out for
the first time, kind of dropping that little hint. And that the son is her son Danny is kind of having these nightmarish visions of what he's destined to become. This part of the sequence got removed. I remember this looks to me like the Jamie Lee walking home scenes in the original movie. And she's very bookish, like this character. She's very much that sort of prototype. And seeing the young couple and, there's kind of a sexual repression going on, bringing some of that back. But all of this got dropped. Just they felt like it didn't move the story along fast enough. And I'm sort of like, that's the point. You kind of want to have moments with a little bit of a slow burn and kind of setting up the...
And again, that was the original Halloween pacing. That's
right.
how it was established, and that's why it was put in the show. So you could have a similar pacing, and there's the bad guy. So you have a chance for him to be peeping around while she's doing her stuff.
Right. And again, all of that just because I think they wanted to make this if you remember, like the cutting in the final version was like all this kind of sort of flashy cuts and knives and slice and dice. And I think they almost wanted to make like an MTV video out of it rather than a Halloween movie. It just ended up becoming something very stylistically very different.
Yeah, and so it became forced, right? This was as designed, and then it was a fixed job.
Right. It was a lot of, because I think that the test audience, and I think it was filled, as I recall, it was filled with like young kids from the Bronx who wanted like Friday the 13th style kills, and that's not the movie that we made or set out to make. So based on those comments and the low test scores, they went back and decided, well, we'll fix it with blood and guts and faster pace editing, and I think that was the wrong thing to do. I think they should have gone more suspense, more terror. And like those moments at the beginning of the movie I pointed out, kind of draw them out, kind of milk it. I mean, John Carpenter is the master of milking a moment. I don't think anybody's walked across the street any slower than Jamie Lee did in that first film.
It was very interesting. I had dinner with Dean Cundy last night.
Wow.
And we did some reminiscing, and John always said that one of the great elements of Halloween is Dean Cundy's camera work and his lighting.
So true.
And so we don't have that stroke of the paintbrush on this version.
Right. Though I think Billy Dixon actually did a good job, and they ended up replacing him during the reshoots with a different DP, and I remember him being really offended and upset, and it just upset a lot of people needlessly. I think that they went and made those changes. And I think created a more confusing movie. I think this one needed some help. I think we could have gone back and done some things with this, but I think ultimately they made the wrong call in terms of how they were going to fix it. This whole sequence and this whole reel for me just is the best part of the movie because it really goes back to it's a character now, this, poor trodden upon mother alone in the house and just, knowing he's out there and knowing he's going to get her at some point or another. And it's just good Halloween stuff. And with your music again, and just those creepy thematic elements that just take you right back to the first movie.
Often Mustafa would say, give me more of that Halloween music.
He really did protect the franchise. I think that title that he kind of got later on, that he was the godfather of Halloween, I think it was kind of true. I think he really had specific things that he wanted. I remember him telling me we can't see him too much. We don't want to see his face. We don't want to, all these, we just don't want to see the shape in every shot of the movie. I think he was right.
Yeah, and I think from his own viewpoint, we say godfather, but he was more patriarch.
Right.
The father of.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, I even named this character here. This is Deborah Strode, and then her abusive husband, John. I didn't mean any disrespect to John Carpenter saying he was this abusive man at all. It's just that they are their parents, and I thought that's a kind of a fun nod. Nobody got my in-jokes until later, like when we were shooting the movie. Oh, now I get it. J.C. Brandy, who played Jamie in the movie, got a lot of them. She would walk up to me on set, and like early in that breakfast scene, he talks about making a stomach pounder. And stomach pounder was something that was in the fog. That the little boy in the fog had said he wants a stomach pounder for breakfast. So I just all this geeky stuff that I tried to get in there as much as I could, just because I love John Carpenter's movies so much, and this meant so much to me.
Yeah, well, that's the setup, right? You've got to be quiet if you're going to have a good scare. And you just know it's going to happen.
Yep.
Red herring.
Red herring, but it kind of worked. I remember the audience did. We got a little cheesy jump out of them.
We were setting up for something,
right.
And then it's like, oh, wrong setup.
And I remember in one of the early drafts, too, there was another kind of, talk about red herring characters. I'd written a character of the mayor of Haddonfield who wore a white suit. He looked like Colonel Sanders. So he was supposed to be like the antithesis of the man in black. He was this man all in white. And I wanted people to think that maybe this is that guy. Maybe this is the guy who is behind all of this. But that character got dropped early on. I think Stephen came about because it's Malik Akkad's middle name, if I'm not mistaken. That's how we named the baby. And this old woman, Mrs. Blankenship, oh my God, the geek stuff never ends. She's a nod right out of number 3. There was a reference to this woman named Mrs. Blankenship in number 3. So even this stuff from the third movie, which had nothing to do with the Michael Myers films, I threw as many little pieces of the mythology in that I could. To sort of intimate, well, maybe she had something to do with that one. I know some fans have written to me asking if there was going to ever be a connection between the bad guy in number 3 with this cult, like that he was somehow involved in that. I said, who knows? The fan fiction is just astounding to me, and I'm eternally flattered when they try to find all these connective threads between what I wrote and, the rest of the films. This is a great moment for Donald Pleasence. Just him sitting down and talking about pure evil is just, again, this is all the stuff that I was really intimidated about writing, and it never sort of lived up to what I think John and Deborah wrote, but it was great to just hear him deliver these kinds of lines, and nobody could deliver it the way he did.
Well, exactly. You could almost ask him to do anything, and he could deliver it with intensity.
Right, the intensity. And here's a cut scene that just looks like Danielle Harris on that table to me. But this sort of this idea that little Jamie had survived this attack in the barn, that got dropped. So that piece that you just saw wasn't in the finished film. But no, you're right. I mean, Donald's intensity and sort of what the gravitas he brought to this part is amazing. I know that they recast him with Malcolm McDowell for the Rob Zombie ones, and he was good, but nobody could touch, I think, what Donald did with this role. Just it was part of him, and I think he loved that a new generation knew of who he was because of the films. I think most of us said he would do up to Halloween 22, and I think he would have.
Strangers letting them in our house?
John, they found Jamie Lloyd this morning. Someone tried to kill her.
I don't know what the hell you're talking about. You ought to stop watching those damn TV talk shows.
I'm getting the children.
That cracks me up. Damn TV talk shows. He is the guy you love to hate.
John, I want you to come with us.
You know, Deborah, you've lost it now. You know that, Deborah? You've just lost it.
The reason you moved us into this house. Your brother could never sell it because of what happened here, could he? And you knew. And you didn't.
She reminds me of the mom and the woman in Jaws who says, "You knew that the shark had eaten a swimmer." You didn't tell us. I think it's funny because some fans have pointed out that the script for this movie, which I think has made its way onto the internet as well, read kind of like Haddonfield was almost like Amity Island. There was this shark out there and things like the helicopter patrolling the neighborhoods and you know, all these sort of intersecting families and stories, which I'll take that as quite a compliment. That's very nice.
Happy Halloween, little girl.
I wish this had been more of just a little bit more of her like packing up, and just maybe we could have played a little bit more of a, you know, kind of a misdirect as to when she was going to get it. But the audience really responded to this scene, I remember, because that axe that we had seen her put in that little container was missing. So we knew something's up. Some fans have sort of argued or kind of rallied against this particular scene just because they say that Michael Myers doesn't use an axe, but I think he uses kind of anything that will do his victims in and that kind of fucks with their minds. Remember in 2, he used the scalpel and he used a hammer and, you know, he got creative as it went on.
Well, he scalded that girl, too.
That's right.
So he didn't need tools.
He didn't. He could use his bare hands if he wanted to.
That was one scene that creeped me out.
The scalding.
The scalding. That
Such
was
a great moment.
too real.
Yeah, it was really effective. Again, bringing just little traces of the Halloween theme in just for these scenes is so great. I think Joe, our director, he threw this gag in about the glasses, which I thought was kind of clever. I liked it. But this one played better for me. It wasn't too gory, and you got the sense, I think I wrote in the script, like it paints the sheets red or something like that, and that's all we needed. I don't think we needed to see an axe, you know, take this woman's head off or slam her in the chest or anything. And surprisingly, they left it that way. That was one that they didn't go back and add more gore to. So I think everybody kind of felt like that section of the movie kind of worked.
Yeah.
It's just as it goes further along, it gets further and further away from, you know.
Yeah, exactly. The changes in the first section, I don't know exactly what the increment would be, were cutting things out.
Right.
And then we got into shooting new things to try to add, repair,
yep. Fill
insert,
in holes. Yep.
Pump it up, which was sort of the directive. Take it. We have a term called OTT, which is over the top.
Yep, I remember. Just that moment with Paul appearing in front of the little boy and the pumpkin dropping, that was kind of a nice nod, at least in my mind. It was supposed to be a nod to the first one when little Tommy gets bullied by the kids and falls and the pumpkin cracks open underneath him. In fact, I think in one of the early drafts he was being bullied. And big Tommy Doyle comes and sort of saves him, which I thought was... All of this is supposed to be through Tommy's point of view. It's almost like this trauma he's experienced as a kid is now going to happen to him all over again. In a different way, but there he is kind of living across the street, and bringing those two houses across the street, I felt like that was really going back to the vibe of the first movie. And also the fact that we find out that this old lady that lives there has something to do with all of this. And I kind of, one of the other sort of nerdy things, I thought, well, that very first shot, if you remember, of the first movie is that POV walking from across the street. And I thought, well, if he was at the old lady's house and she did something to him, sent him back across the way. Again, we're just playing with mythology that was never intended to be anything more than what it was in the first movie, which was just a great classic scary movie. And I don't think anybody can ever capture that lightning in a bottle again. I think we've, you know, it's people with bigger budgets and bigger names than certainly me or anybody involved in this one have tried. I don't think anybody's been that successful at creating that magic of the first movie. You just can't do it.
Well, and magic implies something that you don't understand how it happened, but there it is. And so to analyze magic is not the way to arrive at magic.
I agree. But again, I was so young when I did this, and so eternally and still grateful for the opportunity that I was able to do something that I grew up truly loving and treasuring and always will. I mean, this movie, really did change my life and gave me other opportunities. And I think, and I didn't know Deborah Hill well, but I met her several times, and even before I got this job. And I remember she called and said, "I hope you do a great job because this is a great introduction for you." And she liked the sequel. She wasn't necessarily thrilled with the business aspect of the sequels, I think, but I think she liked that they gave new people, new talent, directors, writers, actors, a chance to work and to be seen. So I think she appreciated that, and I was...
Agreed. What she did is she tried to find joy in the continuations.
Right.
Well, all right, if we're doing this, here's the good stuff.
Right. And she was very supportive. In fact, I remember calling her when we were in post on this, and I remember saying, I would love to have the actual breathing tracks from the first movie, because the breathing through the mask was so specific. And she pointed me out to where they would be. I think they had just done the Criterion Laserdisc, and I went to those people, and unfortunately they didn't end up using those tracks, which I think is, it's almost like Darth Vader's breathing is so specific to that character. I think Michael Myers' breathing should be specific to him as well, and just go back to that original sound.
Actually, in Halloween 2, I was the breath.
Were you?
Yeah, I was the breather.
We should have just had you do it.
Yep.
This was a scene of a lot of discussion among the studio brass, who felt like this whole long walk home and this sort of grabbing the doorknob was just too long, too quiet, not enough of it's like too much build up for not enough payoff. And I think they were going to try to do something where which have really derailed it. I think they were going to make it so she found the dead mother here, which didn't make any sense. We ended up keeping it more or less the way it is now, but I know there was a lot of dissatisfaction with that scene.
I'm your neighbor from across the street, Tommy Doyle.
What are you doing with my son?
I like that this is the moment where she meets this strange guy who's been kind of peering through her windows, and he kind of becomes their protector.
You're in danger.
I've done the Halloween theme in a very protracted way. When musically, if you try to do motifs, right, you can do it faster, slower,
Right.
Change the rhythms, but use the same notes. Back to Beethoven. Da, 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 da. Well, you've got a riff like that you now work as a Halloween quote symphony in every possible permutation.
It's genius, and there's a reason I think it's one of the classic, if not the classic horror theme of all time. It's brilliant in its simplicity.
Well, there was in 2000 there was an article I saw of the top 100 film scores of all time.
And was Halloween on that?
Halloween was definitely on the
It's
list.
fantastic.
And then we got honorable mention for Prince of Darkness.
Wow. Oh, cool. Another underrated one. I like these scenes in his apartment with him looking across the way and seeing the shape. This all felt very reminiscent of the original, with little Tommy seeing him and looking out the window, and kind of like that, Boy Who Cried Wolf. He's there, he's not there.
Mm-hmm.
George Wilbur came back from part 4 to play Michael Myers in this one. He was also, unfortunately, replaced during the reshoots. They used a different stuntman to do Michael, so his look completely changes. Like, he goes from this really hulking guy to this rather svelte one. I think just the strange kind of weird sexual chemistry between these two was kind of interesting. It would have been neat to see if they'd gone on to future episodes, what that would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Although they probably would have killed at least her off in the first scene.
Yeah, but it did become like a little family unit here.
Yeah,
Man,
in a weird
woman,
way.
Baby and son.
Yep. That they kind of found each other, and they were kind of...
And this is long gone.
This is long gone. And this was this very kind of... I actually like some of the things that were in this dream sequence, I thought it was really creepy, and I just remember the music being so gothic and chilling, and just the high-speed film and the black and white and everything that they did with this, I thought was really kind of interesting. Very different from anything we'd seen in any other Halloween. You know, Joe Chappelle took a lot of hits for this movie, but I think he brought some really inventive moments to it, and had an eye for, you know, he knew where to put the camera, and he, you know, I think unfortunately he also fell, you know, victim to a whole lot of cooks in the kitchen, and I think he was trying to please everyone. He and I always got along on set, and I wish him well. He's had a really big career in television, so it's great to see he's gone on to do so many things. This is the one that became so sort of, you know, I think the fans who've seen this bootleg and who will see it now, I think they're going to talk about how, you know, how did she end up having sex with her own uncle? That was never really supposed to be the intent. I think he was supposed to, that face was there. But if you remember that, I'll call it the rape sequence from Rosemary's Baby, where there are all these kind of surreal images kind of floating around her. And she's impregnated, but we just never know by whom and how it all really happened. And this is, again, he shoots her in the head, which I felt like was also just disappointing for me, because I wanted this character to live until the end. This was supposed to be like in 2, where he comes in and he pulls the sheets back after stabbing the bed a bunch of times, and she's gone. There's like pillows under the... And that's what was supposed to happen, at least in the script. And she was just missing. And then she would show up at the very end and show the surviving characters, Kara, Tommy, and the baby, the little boy, the way through those tunnels that she was trapped in the night before. And then she turns around and put up this huge fight with the shape. She died, but kind of more heroically.
Okay.
I love the computer. That just, you know, almost 20 years later.
Ruined decoder.
Decoder. Some fans have this as a kind of like a screensaver or something. I don't know where they get this stuff, but it's always flattering to me when they send me pictures of things that they've created that are based on the movie. And I think all this mythology that he's spouting off here was really just at the behest of some people who felt like we needed to create all of this specific kind of like a, you know, kind of backstory, which I don't think we had to go as far as we ended up going with this. You know, the stars and the kind of the, you know, constellation and all of this. I think it was almost just taking it too far. But, you know, I think they wanted him to be like the conspiracy theorist. Whether or not this is true, this is his, you know, connecting dots after all these years of living with this. And again, trying to bring that symbol that we saw in the 5th movie, kind of trying to find a thread to make that play into this. And of course we see the tattoo that Michael had on his wrist that, you know, apparently spontaneously appeared. But again, all of this is just trying to find new story threads, different ways to go, and I don't think necessarily all of it was successful. Some of it's interesting, some of it's kind of like, oh wow, there's something more to this than just a guy stalking babysitters.
Well, and also in review, here we are several decades later. We're not watching this movie at this time for the story and what happens. We're going to pick it apart.
Right, we certainly are.
And that's okay, because, you know, somebody who bothers to listen to this track is already into what do you guys got to say? What anecdotes do you have? And
yeah, right before this, I actually had fans. I'd kind of put the call out on Facebook to say if there's anything specific you guys want to know about the movie that you've been dying to ask all these years, here's your chance. So as we've been going along, I've been trying to check off that list, and it's just great. You know, there's just been such a fan following for this. This is the one I think has the most, I wouldn't say the most fans, but it's got its major haters for sure. But the fans that love the series are so interested because this version has kind of gone down into a sort of horror legend because it is so radically different from what they put out. It's amazing to me the life that this movie has continued to have because there is this alternate version that's been kind of in the vault all these years. So the fact that, you know, Scream Factory is doing this and putting it out in a form that the fans can appreciate is fantastic.
well, and this is part of the reissue of the Ultimate box set.
Right.
So every outtake, every nuance, everything you ever wanted to know that you couldn't get your hands on before, or as you say, you acquired it as a bootleg. Now it becomes the official release.
Without a doubt. This sequence, I have to say, of all the scenes in the movie, I love the thing with the mother in the house and that build up. But this is just a great, scary, more of a moody moment in the movie where he's walking through this modern day festival that the kids are having, and here's this old woman telling the history of Halloween, very much like sort of John set up in number 2 with Sam Hain, and it was this night where the evil could have from the other side could be visited upon our world. And I think that the fact that Michael Myers lies somewhere between someone who is human and supernatural kind of plays into all of this. I just like this legend and the creepy story of the woman by the fire and telling this. And the way they juxtaposed it with Paul walking through the fair. And your music just sells it.
I remember, the homages back to the rune themes that I had created.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to, again, tie in the mythology.
It's great. It's just creepy, and it brings more of a gothic feel to it that I don't think that earlier entries had.
No, and in fact, even comparing Halloween 1, John's original score, to my Halloween 2 version, that was what I did, was I get feedback that was more goth.
Right.
The darker version.
It's much more intense. I love the score for 2. I love all your scores, Alan. I listen to them all the time, admittedly. This whole sequence where she says he heard the voice, there was this great, and fans know this, there was a novelization of the first movie that opens with this whole prologue about, Michael's grandmother and his mother, and they're sitting down and they're kind of sewing his little clown costume together, and they're talking about how he's been hearing voices and how his great-grandfather had heard a voice before he had committed some unspeakable crime. And that it all kind of took it back to the Druidism and the early kind of Celtic festival of Halloween. I think that John might have even been a little informed with those early scenes when he wrote the TV scenes for the first film, when they went back and added those, and then obviously Halloween 2 where he really brought it back. I mean, he writes the word Sam Hain on the chalkboard. So that's the stuff I wanted to play with a little bit more with this one, because in 4 that got dropped, and 5 they didn't really go down that road either. So I thought it'd be fun to tie in 1 and 2 with 4 and 5 and kind of bring and, kind of marry all of those disparate storylines and characters and bring them somehow together. I think it was maybe a little too ambitious.
Okay, at this point, you're connecting dots that are on different pages.
Absolutely. But we tried.
Yeah.
Again, this was an elongated sequence in the script that just got, I think because of the money people, just got shortened on the day. He was supposed to sit down, make himself this TV dinner. Michael Myers was playing this huge game of cat and mouse with him through the house before the lights went out. But we lost all of that. So again, we go kind of, as you were saying earlier, we kind of go right for the kill in the filmed version, which is disappointing because I think the great thing about Halloween is that Michael Myers is kind of like a child. His psyche maybe became permanently sort of fixated on this time of his life when he was a little boy and he had killed the sister. And now he's sort of acting out all of these childlike games as he sort of sets up his victims. At least that's the way I saw it. I could be completely off base. Anytime there's water on the basement floor and electricity, you probably don't want to be there. This was one of the, blowout kills that they ended up reshooting. And if you remember, Alan, that they detonated the guy's head in the final version, which was, some fans think it was like a crowd-pleasing moment because he deserved it, but it's just so beyond the realm of how that would really work. I just never really loved the notion of the head exploding. I saw this one as violent, but quiet. And once he was dead, I sort of saw smoke rising and just a slow pullback through this dark basement with the water and the sort of playing against the mask and the breathing and him just sort of looking at this guy as he slowly expired. But again, they went more for the quick cut. I guess Michael did the laundry. And again, this looks so different. I think this needed to be redone because it wasn't. I think the angles, some of the things that were just a little off about this that they wanted to fix. And I think the setup of the reshoot was good. They just took it to this point of it being, exploding heads on fuse boxes and just yeah.
Yeah, but the flashing house is fun.
I like that.
Tell me, kids, how's it feel to finally pull Halloween out of the proverbial Haddonfield closet?
What we're saying here is we will no longer let the powers that be control our minds. For years, Halloween has represented everything that's wrong with Haddonfield. But Michael Myers is long gone. There is no boogeyman.
All of this fair stuff, I think, again, like I said, got a bit more truncated. This was designed as a much bigger set piece where later you see this body up in the tree, and I think that was originally written as being kind of like almost like a Halloween piñata that the kids were hitting. I don't know if you remember that in the script, that they were supposed to be hitting it, and slowly the candy starts to fall out, but it's covered in blood, and then there's this body that's sort of tangled up in this mess. And, just I wanted this big sort of eagle eye overview shot of the town just running and sort of seeing that this horror has come back to haunt them. But having this sort of shock jock character, I think it was kind of fun. I think we could have bumped this up a little bit more. I like that the sort of confusion in this version, I think they cut that out in the theatrical, was he gets in the wrong van. He goes for a walk, goes out the back way, and gets in the wrong van. He gets in the van that's labeled Smith's Grove Sanitarium instead of the radio station van, which I think was actually kind of more of a fun bit. Yeah,
well, exactly. As you say, we are having a horror movie here, and we have the killing of people in horrible ways. But to take a little comic relief here and there,
sure,
as long as it's not corny, is
yeah. And here's one of the lines
well.
I was talking about, corny stuff. This is where he's having a rant about shooting or going to the real Myers house, which was one of my own little in jokes. I threw in all of my frustration in some of the dialogue with this guy because I was like, well, why are we not filming it at the real Myers house? Though I think the one we got in this movie looks a lot better than the one they had in 5, which didn't look anything like the house.
Agreed.
But this cut right here, I just think that's funny. He just gets in the van with the sanitarium. And I remember liking the shot where you see him through the windshield stabbing him through the gut, and I think
and this character is good. He's so preoccupied with himself that he just deserves to to appreciate this moment.
Yeah, and I think in the theatrical it cuts kind of right here, and this was removed. I think that was a great kind of iconic Halloween-looking shot.
Yeah,
the mask has always been a point of contention, I know, because it changes so much from movie to movie, and I think a lot of that came from the fact that obviously we all know now the story that I think was was a William Shatner mask that they adapted and painted, and Tommy Lee Wallace did for the first one, but they had to kind of modify it from movie to movie. And I think all the makeup people who got involved also wanted to put their own signature on it. John Buechler did the makeup, and he designed the mask on this one. I think it's one of the better ones. It's not exactly right, but it definitely had an odd, off-putting look to it. It's just such an iconic face that you can kind of project whatever you want onto that.
Mm-hmm.
What you said before about Michael Myers living in our house, is that really true?
It was a cold Halloween night. He stood in the shadows, watching through the windows as his sister and her boyfriend made love. Then he crept inside, picked up a huge butcher knife, and made his way up these stairs. He raised the knife up behind her. She turned around, and he stabbed her.
Cut it out, Beth.
Originally, when I was hired to write the script, they had told me that Fred Walton, who had directed When a Stranger Calls, which was another one of my favorite movies from the late 70s, came out around the same time as Halloween, was going to direct this film. So I was thrilled to know that. So one of the scenes that's coming up in a few minutes where she sees the girl through the through the window, and she says, somebody's in the room and he's right behind you. That was just specifically a nod to When a Stranger Calls. So I thought if Fred's going to direct that, he'll make that scene really play. But again, here's the kind of truncated, simplified version of what I had written for this big, I felt like it should have been this big set piece with all the kids and excitement, and we sort of were left with this one child being bled upon, a body hanging randomly in a tree. It's creepy, but it just doesn't give you the impact. But I like the music. It's great. I don't remember if they removed this theme from the final one or if this was one that survived the final cut. I know so many things changed. I felt like, and I think you and I talked about this at the time, Alan, it became more like a sound design movie than...
Yeah, one of the threads that Joe added in the next version was a sort of pump it up with sound design as opposed to music, which in the minimalist world you wouldn't do that.
Right.
But now he was, quote, modernizing it,
Right.
bringing it current for that time in '94.
Right.
And so, having done that, adding extra sound effects, and there's even some extra little guitar effects and things like that. That I think a buddy of his came in and just gave him some extra little bits and pieces that he could put where he wanted.
Right.
But it really
some of that stuff helped to a certain degree, but I felt like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, pardon the bad pun, but I think that's kind of what happened. They took the stuff that worked and took it out and replaced it with things that didn't work as well, or some things that did work better. It's strange. I think some fans have even done their own ultimate cut of this movie, taking the pieces that that they liked.
Well, maybe that's for next year. We'll have the championship hybrid fan cut.
Sure. I know Danielle Harris has said that she'd come back and shoot the scenes that she should have been in.
Oh, perfect.
I think that would be a lot of fun.
Cut her back in.
This is another favorite moment of the movie. I think he could have drawn the suspense out a little bit more in this one, but it is just a creepy kill. It's like he hands him a towel and there's that rune on his wrist, and I like when he gets out of the shower and the mask is kind of there and it looks creepy. And this is my favorite cue that you wrote for the movie coming up, which is it's just the theme, but you added so many cool layers to this as it builds and builds. The mask looks great there, and it's a great, scary kill. And it's simple. It's just him with a knife and a mirror, and it's effective.
Right, but with that kill, the pace of the movie is now we're in.
Right. Yeah, this is the...
It's not going to slow down from
right.
here.
This, to me, is the Halloween... This is the... If there's a signature scene for Halloween 6, this is the one.
Mm-hmm. Right. All hell is breaking loose.
Yep.
I'm across the street. I can see you. Beth, I want you to listen to me.
I think in the final version, they slowed this down so that the kill was longer, like slow motion. When he's stabbing her, it was much more kind of in a more dramatic... It needed it. It needed more dramatic impact. But something about the simplicity of that is just unnerving. Just the way that music builds there is so great. And all well shot.
No!
Actually, listening to that cue, I realized that this is the guitar thing actually came in on the remake.
Oh, okay.
And the quote, "pump it up more." I was pretty, I'll use the word stock or consistent with what was Halloween music.
So did you go back and when they did the revised version, you scored a new kind of, or added layers to what?
Yeah, I added some more stuff again. Stuff that was asked for, so hence the guitars and the drums,
right?
And some new cues for the new scenes.
all these themes are classic. I think a lot of this stuff I want to say of your music got dropped out of the theatrical, or this felt to me like it was became more creepy sound design, almost otherworldly stuff started to happen, screams and weird disembodied voices and things like that they put in to just make it a little more tactile, just make it feel like things coming out of every speaker or something. But it just
and also back to how that doesn't work is because now there was always something going on.
Right.
So when we talk about sound design, we're really meaning atmospheres, just creepy tones that hung there with "this is weird."
Right.
But you have to stop.
Yep. It doesn't have to be bombarding.
Allow the track to empty out.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time we enter for whatever it is we're going to do, it has shock value.
Right. I know in the script it was slightly different how she found them. I honestly don't remember how it was written, but I know that they weren't just sort of lying in a bed. It was more of like that fun house sort of vibe in the first one where they're in different places and she's sort of finding bodies of,
right.
in
And
different corners.
In this case, because of the potential relationship between Michael Myers and the kid will remain unscathed.
Right.
Mom, we got a problem.
We do. Just all these scenes in the house, though, where there's just that stalk and chase, it just always seems to work. And I remember the audience just definitely responding in these scenes, especially when he goes down the steps and falls, and she has to kind of step over him. All that stuff got very intense for the audience. It becomes very participatory. I think the audience wants to talk back to the characters.
Right, and part of what works in a Halloween is the confining space.
Right.
You got no place to go, and we're all kind of stuck in a small space. And
yep. And here he comes. I remember all of this had to be shot very quickly, and I think they missed the close-up of her hiding in the corner. Just a few things that just, you're fighting budget and, time. Time is never your friend on shows like this, or any show, but particularly ones like this that are made for such a small budget.
We're very pleased that Michael Myers fell down the steps.
Yeah.
But being unstoppable and unbreakable.
Yep. The big set piece that got excised, never got shot for this scene, was when they make their escape from the house. She was actually supposed to go down with the little boy in after he trips her. Right after this moment where she steps over him, she was supposed to go to the basement door, and that's how they got out of the house. In fact, she found the father, and she used that, instrument, that tire iron or whatever, impaled him to the fuse box. She used it to literally climb out the basement window. So there was this bigger set piece where they had to escape from the house. But again, because of time and budget, I think that got cut too.
Come to mommy. Daddy, please.
But this was a good, scary moment that definitely got the audience going, because there he is lying right there. And
this is well designed.
And here again, it's a good example, Alan, where you just stop the music.
The silence is as effective as making a lot of noise right now.
And the shape stalks theme, which is great.
It's, again, part of the Halloween vocabulary of music.
Yep.
Which is just one note in a rhythm, and then more stuff gets hung on it, and discords and.
Well, the fact that I got to be a part of this, and that you wrote music for this Halloween movie I wrote, I can't tell you what just as a kid that grew up just loving these movies and watching them endlessly on a loop and knowing every line. I mean, I think it was kind of the inside joke that I, probably knew more about these movies than the Akkads even. I think they used to try to trip me up with trivia questions and things, but I just really did grow up with these. So to just see all of this happen and to see that, he's walking across the street and chasing this girl, and it all was a dream come true in a big way.
Where's the baby?
He's gone.
And this is for me, this whole sequence coming up is really where the movie kind of fails. It just kind of goes down this road that should have, we could have continued that vibe that we had in the last 10 minutes. Now it becomes this bigger story. It becomes this man in black, and it becomes this coven. I think had this stuff been handled in a slightly different way, I think it might have been more effective. Just darkening that house, having people coming through, and we don't know who they are or where they're coming from. Actually, I remember being very inspired by the fog in that third act in the church, and how those figures were kind of descending upon those characters. I think that vibe would have helped it a little bit more. And then this reveal, I think it could have been a little spookier. She nosedives out the window, and I feel like that's, for me, the movie kind of nosedives. The fact that they don't take Loomis and Tommy with them and sort of leave them there, and I didn't quite get where they were going. I think in the script, they had sort of taken everyone and kind of transplanted the third act to the bowels of Smith's Grove. So all of this kind of goofy dialogue here where he's like, "Oh, I've been drugged," and all this, that wasn't... I'd like to claim ownership. I didn't write it.
Well, that's your Halloween 1 ending.
Right. And here we go. This is the stuff I kind of call the Temple of Doom. Just this big kind of set piece, which was, I remember, an elaborate, expensive set.
$29.95.
Probably so. Maybe $30. But I think this is the point at which we all realize this movie needs to be enhanced. We need to increase the scare quotient. But this is also the point at which they went and they reshot things that made it a much different movie. And suddenly it's, doctors performing genetic experiments, and I don't know what they were doing in those scenes, but, just a bunch of kind of gory set pieces and a lot more cat and mouse chasing around this hospital is what was added later, without really bringing any kind of satisfying conclusion to everything that we've set up. So as much as I think this version is better because it's a little bit more grounded as far as what we've been seeing prior to, I still think that we could have done something with the scares and just made it a little more intense here.
Yeah, and you can also see why the quote, "it had its problems," and how that triggered the floodgates of we're fixing. Well,
that's why I think it's interesting to release this version. And I think since, when this movie was made, there wasn't even DVD yet. So there was no such thing, as far as I am aware, of alternate cuts and director's cuts and, in this case, producer's cuts.
No, and in fact, this is still when you released a film, piece of 35 for your distribution before digital, and there was a cost involved.
Right.
I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but like $1,300 or $1,500 a print. And it was shipped in some big cans that probably cost $400 to get them there.
Yeah.
So the idea of making alternates or any variations,
right,
didn't
not even
know about it.
Yeah, just didn't. But all of this stuff plays as kind of gothic and creepy, but you lose the sort of the intensity of where we've been. And I think this is the stuff that we could have gone in and I think really given it more just intensity and more of a scare. I think, sadly though, at this point, Donald had passed away. He died, I want to say, sometime in February. And the movie hadn't, and I don't think they went in to do those reshoots until that summer. So a lot of that I do recall was having to kind of write around him and kind of figure out ways to use the footage we did have. It wasn't as bad as something like The Crow with Brandon Lee, who died halfway through the shoot.
Or Brainstorm.
And more recently, Fast and Furious. We didn't have it that bad, but it's never great when your leading man or second leading man dies before the movie's really done. Donald never saw the movie. I don't think ever saw this version. I don't think he would have been happy necessarily with what they did with it. But it was certainly a pleasure to have him and to see him do that role again. And I think the way that this version ends with him kind of taking on that mantle and kind of becoming that next kind of guardian of the evil that Michael, and rather than kind of being his hunter, he becomes his protector. I like that. I like that twist. Gave somewhere for things to go. that wasn't just the same movie again and again. And I think that's really what we tried to do. It's always, the challenge with any sequel is trying to do something the same but different. And it's never an easy one to pull off.
Yeah, it's just the pacing. We spent a lot of time trying to tie up all the dots right now.
Right.
And we want to see some more people get killed.
We do, right. And I think, that's ultimately what they did. They just kind of did the wrong thing. I think had we maybe kept it in the house, or had we kept it in the town, kind of dealt with this Man in Black character there in the house and kind of, and brought it back to the shape and him, going after the people that we've kind of come to know. But again, there were some serious difficulties in our hands, being that Donald did these scenes, and that's all we had. So they kind of wanted to use what they could and salvage what they could. I remember there was a double walking around that set when they were doing those reshoots who looked exactly like him, and it was this very strange moment where you kind of looked and you're like, is he back? Again, there were so many different scripted endings. I remember one where at the very end that Tommy Doyle and Kara and the children, they end up back at that bus station that we saw at the beginning, and she ends up in the washroom, and he hears a scream, and he finds her dead on the floor, and the children are missing, and the cops are coming, and the whole thing was going to end where Tommy, who's this obsessed Michael Myers follower, conspiracy theorist, ends up basically holding the bag. It looks like he's responsible for all of this, which I actually thought was kind of a cool ending. There was another much, again, bigger budget version where Dr. Wynn took off in his helicopter, and unbeknownst to him, his black satchel was filled with explosives, and boom, the whole thing went kabang. So fans ask me all the time about all the endings, and there were so many of them. We rewrote the script so many times. I just wish we had not done kind of this big, goofy, I think, temple setup here. This is the stuff that needed to be redone, and I'm glad they did. But there are pieces of it that I like and that some fans actually have really kind of grown to like. It's definitely much more of a mythic movie than any of the earlier ones.
You know whose baby it is, don't you?
Michael!
The baby is yours, isn't it? Isn't it, Michael?
Back off! Untie her.
Do as he said! Do it! You should join us. You have talent.
Again, all this stuff I think just plays so goofy and silly, but I do like it, and I think where it picks up again is when they start racing down those tunnels and all that. Gets to be fun again. I think if we'd sidestepped some of this goofy stuff, it would have been much better.
It's just not believable that it would happen that way.
Not at all.
One knife to the guy's throat,
right.
But there's
and it's all just
25 other people in the room.
Nobody does anything. Yeah, I just think had it been choreographed better, more suspensefully, I just don't think we needed all these guys in the dark robes running around a mental hospital.
And this part actually does come back into the other cut now, right?
Yes, pieces of this I think they end up using. I think we got rid of the costume on him, so I think maybe this little POVs and things like that were salvaged. When Donald comes off the elevator, that got used. So it was all very like a tricky, way to, a series of cuts to try to use whatever footage they had of Donald Pleasence. Again, this was another, one of 5 different endings. I think the director or somebody had suggested him doing something with the runes and creating this sort of circle, which I, again, thought was a little goofy and not really believable.
Yeah, why would the magic be in these?
Yeah, I call them the magic acorns. Like, this stuff made it into the final, but it was just these little pieces of footage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could have given us at least a special effect, some kind of ring of light or something, but that didn't quite play. And he just sort of freezes, and I don't know. It just, again, there were real reasons, and I think by looking at this version, you can see why it had to be reshot and to come up with something a little bit more intense. I just wish that it had stuck more with the story and kind of gone back to the flavor of what we had done earlier in the movie. This is kind of where it all, to me, just falls apart.
Yeah, why did Michael let him go? Mike's supposed to kill everything in his path.
Absolutely. The power of the runes stopped him. Gotta love that line. That was, I think that was a Joe line.
What have they done to you?
Fans have asked why he wore those spurs and the hat and all of that. All I could say is maybe he really liked Westerns.
He was just weird.
He was just a weird guy. I think had we gone and done that bus depot ending, it might have been cooler. I think there's just so many different incarnations of this in different ways and different story things that we could have kind of wound it up in a more satisfying way.
And you can see that we get to this end, whatever happens, happens, and how when it came time to do the next one, it was really, let's just trash the whole thing and go someplace else.
And it made sense. I mean, they brought, Jamie Lee Curtis decided she would make the next one her return to the series, which made perfect sense, and I think it was the right time for that to happen. And I think in the treatment that Kevin Williamson had written, that he did acknowledge the continuity line of 4, 5, and 6, but ultimately they dropped it because they were like, why even cross-pollinate this thing and make it confusing for general audiences? Let's just call it a wash and move on. So, and plus it would have made her like the world's worst mother, like she abandoned her daughter and took her son.
Well, Donald, you're kicking the ruins.
He did.
It should break the magic.
Right. Well, I guess. Michael decided to switch costumes. It was just silly stuff. I really wanted this ending. I had this thing in my mind of like these two doctors, the good doctor, the evil doctor, kind of vying for the soul of Michael Myers. It was like a kind of a thing between the two of them, this sort of battle at the end. And then the whole thing with Jamie returning at the end, it would have been a great sort of...
And the magic transference of the transfers.
Tattoo. This is a strange moment, but fans seem to like this, at least a lot of the ones I hear from. And there he is in the man in black costume, makes his way into the night, and, evil lives on. I think the giveaway was supposed to be the boot, but I guess that was the clue.
Yeah, that was your clue.
Yeah.
Swapped everything else, but I keep my shoes on.
I keep my shoes.
Otherwise, you have to change the sound of my Foley.
That's right. And who could afford that? I remember in the script, I think it had also been like we were supposed to see this series of shots of all of the set pieces that all of the horror had gone on, kind of like their film in the first film, and where the music sort of builds to the end, but we didn't get those shots.
All right, well, thank you, Dan. To be honest with you, I didn't remember the details to this until we watched it.
I had to do a little reviewing myself, but I'm glad this is out there. I'm glad fans can appreciate that there was a different version. I don't think by any means the perfect version, not the one that I intended it to be, but certainly an interesting look back on the making of a movie and kind of what happens when a lot of people get involved and without really a single vision. But we had fun making it. I was proud to be a part of it, and I'm glad that the fans have sort of stuck by this movie and fought for this release for so many years. So much appreciated. Happy Halloween.